In crimson it began, and in crimson it ended. And then we were free.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Final Fantasy XIV and lore video. Today we'll be talking about the great nation which followed the Comet of Rauga, that over time faced occupation and oppression, that eventually brought about its own liberation, the city-state of Ala Mhigo. As though it were bound to me by fate, today's story too starts by speaking about the end of the War of the Magi. As the war came to a head between the three great nations, the clash between the white magics of Amdapor and the black magics of Mark, the scholarly fairies of Nim, and the overwhelming Voidsent, all became more desperate and ferocious, trying to force an end to the war. After depleting the land of its ether, the balance began to rapidly shift, foretelling the sign of a coming calamity. As the waters rose and engulfed all they touched, the inhabitants of Eorzea fled to ever higher ground to evade their watery grave. Among those that fled, a mass group of people, including many here, fled to the mountains of Girobania, guided by a burning comet falling from the sky, where they struggled to survive among the sparse resources and shelter. Due to this, those living among the mountains soon split into many different factions, fighting and arguing over land disputes to try and gather more resources for themselves. This divide caused a trend to break out within the new factions. Feudal wars would break out, eventually leading to a particular clan winning much territory, after which the smaller surrounding clans would combine their forces to tear down the larger faction. While this sounds good on the surface, it would lead to the temporary alliance breaking down, with no common goal in mind. The wars would then eventually start up again, and the cycle would repeat. One thing the many clans shared as a common ground, however, was their belief of Rauga's guidance to their new land, and that each of them were righteous in the Destroyer's gaze. Around the 1100th year of the 6th Astral Era, a man named Anshelm Cotter, a Highlander here born during the feudal wars of his nation, decided upon being the person to subjugate and unify the factions under a single banner. He was an incredible tactical genius in warfare, and although as usual the smaller factions rose against him, he scattered their forces with ease thanks to his skill in battle. After much fighting and 35 years or so of time, Cotter managed to defeat his final opposition, at last uniting the clans of Girobania under a single banner. In the following years, Cotter had to carefully plan the location for the fortress that would become the new home for the nation, and decided upon the shores of the Locks, with its back against the mountains for natural defence. The only land route between Uldanard and Ilsabard led straight through Girobania, meaning that any coming from the north that might have invasive intentions may simply choose to sweep Ala Mhigo aside before moving on to the Shroud. So it was that the enormous citadel was constructed with walls thick and tall, manned every day by soldiers. The plan, as it turned out, was a vital one for their survival, as many attacks did come from the north in an attempt to break through, but none ever made it to the city proper. Following this, the Ala Mhigans established watchtowers along the roads leading to Uldanard, using them as a de facto toll road to charge much needed coin for protection for the merchants using the safer roads opposed to braving the mountains. The economy and peoples prospered for a time after this, enjoying the benefits of guarding a trade route important for all the peoples on either side of their citadel. However, after the dust settled from the conflict with Sildi and Uldar, with the result being that Uldar controlled Thanalan fully, the merchant state began employing large cargo ships to carry goods and valuables by sea to all corners of the realm. This of course eventually struck a blow to the coin flowing through Ala Mhigo's road, slowing the amount of passers to a trickle. This was due to the vast size of Uldar's ships, each able to take much more individually than a whole convoy of caravans, as well as the fact that no port was charging their visitors for access. Feeling the pinch of the reduced influence from his kingdom, King Manfred of Ala Mhigo decided to make do by instead laying claim to other civilizations' territory, with his eyes fixed heavily upon the Black Shroud, looking to take the lush lands for his own. He sent his own vast army to the Twelveswood, in a conflict eventually known as the Autumn War. Although initially Manfred's attack easily routed the Gridanian troops, allowing him to extend his reach into the Shroud after the First Battle of Tinolka, the other city-states within Uldanard heard Gridania's plea, each retaliating to push the aggressors back to Girobania. With Limsa Lominsa, Uldar and even Ishgard present, Manfred began to lose ground, eventually resulting in the loss of a master tactician and general of the Ala Mhigan forces, Gilbard. It's worth noting that this collaboration of forces between the city-states would come to be known as the First Eorzean Alliance, and would later lay the foundation for those states to ally once more after the fall of Thordan VII. After the second battle at Tenorca, the Ala Mhigan forces retreated in earnest, truly defeated and repelled from taking the Shroud for good. After the conflict finally settled, Manfred saw the repercussions of sending Ala Mhigo into a war it was far from prepared to win. Although the initial skirmishes brought heavy patriotism and morale to the people, as the territory was lost once more, citizens found themselves not only without the pride of victory, but without any of the spoils and riches of war. As their soldiers traipsed home, even then the influence of the king began to sprout disdain within the peoples, heavily due to the now plummeting economy of the citadel. A certain unease took hold of the nation, eventually allowing the Fist of Rauga, and monastic people living in the area of Rauga's reach and beyond, to take to the political forefront of the government, gaining more support every day. Thankfully, the royals at the time chose to move forward diplomatically with this change in power, embracing the Fist and allowing them to assign advisors to the throne, from among the highest ranking monks within the order. Through this, they sought to balance the nation in an attempt to stabilise the losses from the war, and although some success was had, it was much more beneficial for those following the Fist, as the religion held much greater sway within Ala Mhigo from then on. About 80 years passed with this new regime in full swing until Theodoric, an ambitious and self-interested man, rose to the throne. It is unknown if Theodoric is directly related to King Manfred, but if so, he would likely be his grandson. Unfortunately, however, due to Theodoric's attitude towards ruling, he would turn out to be the last monarch ever to rule Ala Mhigo as king. Having observed the rise in power of the Fist of Rauga since his youth, he came up with a plan to oust them from their positions. Proclaiming himself as the chosen emissary of Nemea, he forbade the worship of the other deities and commanded his subjects to prostrate themselves in the spinner's name. For obvious reasons, the Fist of Rauga began to heavily protest Theodoric's new order. As an apparent act to defend against the treason of the monks, Theodoric then led an army against the main temple of the Fist, slaughtering any monks and ordering the temple to be put up in flames when his men reached it. He told his men to slay even those fleeing for their lives, ensuring none of the line remained, and went on to oppress any who saw through his reasoning of going after the Fist. Not able to silence the people, however, Theodoric soon found himself facing a great mob of people rioting outside his palace. He therefore ordered a then lesser-known soldier, a young Roban Alden himself, to silence the crowd of people. In the notable occurrence, Roban managed to do so without shedding blood, earning him great respect amongst the people. For Theodoric, however, this was just the beginning of his terrible reign, as he began to grow more paranoid and brutal. He began convincing himself that he was forever surrounded by traitors, and starting by ordering the execution of the other royalty within the palace. He kept this slaughter up even down to those smaller folk who had even the slightest wealth or influence. It was said that many of those sent to execution were taken to the divine audience in the locks, and dropped off at height to their doom. Between the senseless killings, and the ever more ridiculous charges given to the victims, the queen and wife of Theodoric could no longer stand to watch the slaughter. Conspiring with a group of surviving nobles, they created a plan to turn the knife upon Theodoric and end his reign. The plan, however, was outed by one of the group that betrayed the secret to the king, and he came upon them with a great vengeance, slaughtering all involved, including the queen. The halls of the palace ran with blood, and Theodoric truly earned the title of the King of Ruin. The king would rule for a few more years even after the chaos and bloodshed caused by his hand. In the year 1557 of the 6th Astral Era, however, things eventually came to a head, and the masses brought about a revolution in the palace. The leaders of what would eventually become the Ala Mhigan resistance began to amass forces, including Curtis Hext. He visited the many towns around the peaks and the fringes to call any to arms against Theodoric, even recruiting the younger Roban as well as one Ilbert Fear, another Ala Mhigan soldier. The combined forces approached the gates, and the guard, also sick of subjugation under Theodoric's iron fist, allowed them to pass without retaliation, eventually joining them at the rear to storm the palace at their side. The great swell of people was so much that the Corpse Brigade, the personal guard of the King of Ruin, simply fled the palace and scattered, allowing the rebels to easily take the entire city. Theodoric, now without protection or the company of his allies, had the choice of facing the mob now storming towards the throne room, or finding another way out of the situation. Fittingly, he chose his own course, ending his own life before having to face the consequences of his decade-long rule. As the people started to celebrate their long-awaited freedom once more, and the banners of the Mad King were lowered and replaced with those of a free Ala Mhigo. A threat loomed to the north that the nation could never have prepared for. Implied to be the very same day of the storming of the palace, and if not then, very soon after, the 14th Imperial Legion, led by the feared Gaius van Belsar, also awaited the end of Theodoric. Using the unrest now striking the citadel once more, they rapidly stormed in behind the rebels, surrounding the entire area. Although many Ala Mhigans were trained in fighting, as well as those who still tried to follow the path of the fist, they stood no chance against the organised and trained soldiers of Garlemald, and no less against their advanced cerulean technology. In the same period of time that Ala Mhigo looked to a brighter future, they now stood under the banner of that which they feared, attacks from northern Ilsabard resulting in the Imperial banner flying above Ala Mhigo. Gaius van Belsar now stood as the Imperial Viceroy in the annexed territory, and quickly put steps into action to hold his new lands for Garlemald. He expanded Garlean checkpoints across all of Giribania, notable of which included Castellum Veladina and Castrum Urbania, each holding a vital choke point within the fringes and the peaks respectively. Upon reaching the border to the Shroud, he commissioned the construction of an enormous wall, spanning between the mountains all the way along the border to deter the Eorzean alliance. The leaders of the rebellion against Theodoric would soon go on to form the Ala Mhigan resistance to begin pushing for yet another revolution in Ala Mhigo to free it from Garlemald's clutches, but this time the endeavour would be much more arduous. As the wall was constructed, it forced the citizens to make a choice for themselves, to either stay within Giribania where passage between there and the Shroud would pose great difficulty, or to flee west and forge a new path. The remnants of the latter choice resulted in the founding of Little Ala Mhigo, a small settlement in southern Thanalan, with many resistance-minded people. Many there would go to great lengths to see Ala Mhigo free, with some even taking drastic action. Life meanwhile on the Giribania side of the war became a fight for survival for many. Once the Garleans had established themselves as a ruling force, they came to expect tithe and work from the local Ala Mhigans, and to refuse the offices was to put oneself and their family at risk. A long period of suffering began, with many heavily resenting their subjugators. But, unable to do anything about it, many simply chose to live on quietly to avoid trouble. The Garleans would also begin integrating themselves into the Giribanian lands, even going so far as to alter the words to the anthem of Ala Mhigo, hoping not only to solidify themselves as the ruling force, but also to convert those young enough only to know Garlemald as the ruler. Although the situation within Giribania would remain unstable for several years after this, unrest once again began to stir following the events concerning Belsar's wall. Ilberd, once a good friend of Roban and a fighter for Ala Mhigo, transpired to be plotting a great and terrible plan to force the hand of fate to free his homeland. After having his followers pose as troops from the recently formed Second Eorzean Alliance, the situation upon the wall was thrown into chaos, as many believed that Garlemald would see the Alliance uniforms and assume that an attack was coming. After the Warrior of Light and the Scions confronted Ilberd upon the wall, however, he revealed his true plan was to use the thoughts of vengeance of his soldiers to call upon an almighty primal capable of tearing the Imperials apart. He pulled the eyes of Nidhogg from his pack and began the spell to summon the primal, with the end result not only costing Papalymo his life, but the primal called forth would eventually break free from its prison. To try and counter this new threat, the Alliance agreed to attempt to awaken Omega, an Allagan construct said to wield incredible destructive power, capable of giving even Bahamut a challenge. The group assists Sid and Nerotol Skava in awakening the automaton, resulting in a fight with the Imperial officer known as Grimwart, and managed to successfully send the machine at the dangerous primal. After fighting a while with Omega, the worm Shimru would descend in the direction of Giribania, prompting the Alliance to truly take action and enter the fringes to assist freeing Ala Mhigo. The Scions too would plan to follow and fight for freedom, with Elise revealing herself as having impersonated her sister Ida for years under Papalymo's protection. In the palace at Ala Mhigo, meanwhile, with the previous defeat of Gaius van Belsar, a new viceroy takes his place. Unfortunately for the Alliance, it so happened to be the leader of the 12th Garlean Legion and heir to the throne of Garlemald, Xenos Ye-Galvus. Soon after the Scions and Alliance entered Giribania, they would begin exploring the fringes, to meet with the Ala Mhigan resistance with Comrade at his head. To spur support for the Alliance, the group splits to focus on two regions of Giribania, with one heading back to the fringes to scout and skirmish the Imperials of the area, and the other to the peaks, to see the state of the local Ala Mhigans there. In the fringes, we assist Alizé and the Alliance with the reconnaissance, and eventually encounter Grimwart again, defeating his new prototype Magitek machine. Over in the peaks, Lise attempts to reconcile an Alagana where she once grew up, finding that many of its inhabitants gave up the fight a long time ago. After some assistance from her and the Warrior of Light, however, many begin to change their tune. We also discover the Skulls, led by Fordola and Lupus, working for Garlemald even though they too are of Ala Mhigo blood. The culmination of our efforts so far allowed the Resistance and Alliance to plan a joint attack at Castel and Veladino, in an attempt to secure a deeper foothold into Giribania. As our investigation of the bridge begins, however, we see smoke pouring out above Rauka's reach, and hasten back to discover that Fordola has given the location to Xenos, who marches among the fray, easily cutting down any who stand against him, Y'shtola not least of all. The Warrior of Light arrives too and encounters him after fighting through the throng, discovering that they are easily outmatched by the Crown Prince. He leaves us bodily injured but turns away, considering himself bored with the fight. After licking the wounds left by the man, a small contingent would decide to split the Imperial's attention by travelling to Doma across the ocean, in an attempt to spur revolution there and free the Eastern nation. After a great journey through Yangsha, home to Doma Castle, as well as the sweeping Azam Steppe, where our allies would become worthy in the eyes of Bardam, hero of the steppe, they would mount an assault on the castle with all the peoples of the region. Successful in their attempt, though with many losses in the fight with the castle itself, the triumphant group returned to Giribania to turn their focus once more to the now divided attention of the 12th Legion. Another assault on Veladino would be carried out, with the plan this time being to convince the Imperials of their loss by having a glamour placed upon a huge flag sailing atop the base. This plan works, and the Alliance successfully push the Imperials from the fringes. They move onwards to the peaks, securing yet another forward base in Alagiri, and begin quickly moving to Specula Imperatoris and Castrum Urbania. Although they built momentum steadily until now, the Resistance would suffer a devastating loss at Imperatoris, with Fordola commanding the troops at Urbania to fire upon the main tower of the structure, destroying it and causing chaos at the fight below. When the dust clears, Lys is found kneeling over Comrade, blinded and wounded from the blast, and would eventually succumb to his injuries after passing the torch of the Resistance to Lys.
I will, Conrad. I will. I promise.
The latter now filled with the wisdom and determination gained from her time in Doma, as well as the experiences in Giribania so far, Lys would be vital in infiltrating into Castrum Urbania to disable the cannon and overrun the Imperials there to prevent any further destruction. After a successful two-pronged attack, Fordola is found once again in the command room. After Lys berates her actions and attacks, Fordola manages to strike Alizé thanks to a yet unknown power and flees through the large window, inviting all there to Xenos' hunt at the palace. Meanwhile, Kryl, earlier kidnapped by Fordola, is seen in a research facility, presumably within the Ala Mhigo citadel itself, subjected to an experiment by Aulus Mal Ursina. With Urbania now in Alliance hands, their eyes finally turn to the stronghold within the locks and the awaiting Imperial forces stationed there. Lys surprises the Warrior of Light with an outfit change, telling them that the dress once belonged to Ida, and to honour her sister, she will wear it to see Ala Mhigo's freedom. Soon after this, the Alliance plant a foothold at Porta Praetoria in the locks, and the Scions join them in planning the assault towards the citadel. We assist in retrieving a key used for the entrance to a forgotten well within the city that draws its water from the locks, and together with Lys and Thancred, we swim deep through the path that leads up into the well. Now inside the city, the group unlocks a gate to allow entry for the Alliance troops, and then makes haste to the research facility keeping Kryl. We encounter Fordola once more, engaging her in combat and using the tool given by Urianger to dull her senses, eventually overwhelming her to free Kryl. Although beaten, Fordola warns that we are nothing to Xenos, and we discover that the power being used by her is similar to that of the Echo. After bringing Fordola back to the Alliance and discussing the secret weapons being held by Xenos, the Alliance along with the Resistance begin moving on the palace at Ala Mhigo, unleashing a barrage of siege attacks along its outer walls. Cannon fire as well as the Uldan's Thaumaturge's magics rain upon the heavy-set gates of the inner city, with the Alliance showing that they are polite enough to knock. As airborne Imperial defences begin retaliating, a screech is heard from above and we see Lord Hien of Doma, along with Ugiri and many others riding their Yol birds, dismantling the Magitech machines with ease thanks to their mount's swiftness. With the distraction now taken care of, the cannons resume fire upon the gate, until finally a small opening is made, enough for a contingent of troops to enter. With Alphino, Lys, Roban and Arenvold all willing to stand at the Warrior of Light's side, they turn to enter the palace. After a hard-fought battle through the Imperial barricades and defences, we finally reach the throne room to find Xenos eagerly awaiting the next fight. At last we are able to fight him equally, managing to push him back. He soon retreats to the Royal Menagerie, however, where we find Ilburd's own primal Shimru bound by a huge Magitech field. Xenos, reveling in the fact that he finally found an equal with whom he can fight, activates the same power as Fordola, the Resonant, and merges with Shimru to take control of the worm. He taunts the Warrior of Light and takes flight, with the latter giving chase to face him once and for all. After crossing a long bridge to a high platform at the back of the citadel, the worm Xenos turns to face us. Shimru unleashes the power of many different icons, using all sorts of elements and magics to devastate the adventuring group. After a while, the worm vanishes and traps the party in conjured chains, forcing them to break free. And as they do so, Shimru bursts through the floor as the group clings onto its scales for dear life. After dealing with the spawn of the worm and dodging its mighty wings and tails, Shimru roars and steadily vanishes, plummeting back down to the ground. The worm's form fades with a green glow, and Xenos alone crash lands atop the flowers in the Royal Menagerie, with the Warrior of Light materializing soon after. Amazingly, the Crown Prince staggers to his feet and picks his blade up as Alphino and Lys arrive from behind. He laments that he has become the hunted, but notes that although defeated, he knows only joy. He then holds his blade to his neck, and Alphino cries out. Lys charges at Xenos, but before she can reach him, he lets slip the blade with a final smile and falls to the ground, dead. Not long after, more of our allies arrive, with Roban telling Lys not to concern herself with the dead, and to focus on the living. Arenvold and his troop arrive too and spot Xenos' body, where he draws his horn and proudly blows the tune, signalling the triumph and the freeing of Ala Mhigo. Those present begin gathering to Lys as she walks toward the balcony overseeing the city, and we come across the rest of our allies as we turn the corner. Letting Lys take the lead, the mass of people follow on as a loud song begins to break out, with the army of Ala Mhigans present finally able to cry out their true national anthem. In the aftermath of the final battle at the palace, Lys walks through the streets at the citadel, spotting Fordola being taken to a holding cell within the walls. Her travels take her to Porta Praetoria, where she spots some of the Alliance soldiers kneeling over two of those lost to the battle, giving her own solemn prayer. Remembering her own experiences and what they brought, she vows to herself and to Papalymo to create a home for all Ala Mhigans to live free, as a nation that is no longer, and never will be, under the thumb of de facto ruler ever again. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Although focused on a topic not within my usual range of choice, it was enjoyable to learn myself about the past of Ala Mhigo, as well as reliving its liberation. And although the future for the city-state now seems uncertain, many know in their hearts that that future can only bring a brighter tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching. I'll have said so in the other Ala Mhigo video depending on the order I upload these, but I'd like to try and get to 1,000 subscribers this year, so if you did enjoy this one, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more Final Fantasy XIV lore. Take care everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.